The great sovereign council of Ziril gathered in the grand chamber of the celestial Concord, their towering crystalline forms shimmering under the gravity-warped light. The atmosphere was tense, thick with the weight of a decision that could shape the fate of the galaxy. At the center of the chamber, an enormous holographic display flickered to life, revealing the war-torn surface of a remote human-controlled outpost, Argos 7. A recording played. A lone figure, scarred, battle-worn, draped in shredded combat gear, stood in the ruins of a collapsed stronghold. His name, General Elias Voss, the last human commander still resisting the Dominion's conquest. The war should have ended long ago. Humanity was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched. Every strategic model had predicted their collapse within months. Yet against all logic, against every superior tactic, they endured, they adapted, they fought back. The camera panned to an alien strike force closing in. The Zorkai assassins, elite bioengineered executioners, moved in perfect synchronicity, their weapons gleaming with the energy of 1,000 slaughtered worlds. Their sole objective, eliminate the last human general. But Voss didn't run. Instead, he smiled. With a flick of his wrist, a hidden signal activated. The entire battlefield shifted. Hidden traps sprang to life. Collapsing structures forced bottlenecks, and firestorms erupted from rigged fuel caches. The assassins, once the galaxy's most feared executioners, were suddenly the hunted. The footage cut to the aftermath. The strike team was gone. Nothing remained but scorched ground and the echoes of screams. General Voss had vanished, slipping away like a ghost, leaving behind only the shattered remains of the Dominion's best warriors. The council chamber was silent. Then a voice, cold and calculating, echoed through the assembly. The assassins failed. It was the Dominion's High Executor, his tentacled visage darkened with barely contained fury. We sent our finest to end him, and instead we lost them. We underestimated the humans. Again, a murmur rippled through the gathered leaders. The question lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. What if humanity could not be broken? What if they were only getting started? The Dominion had ruled the stars for millennia. No species had ever withstood their might for long. Their expansion was inevitable, their power absolute. And yet one species, one insignificant, war-weary, scattered race, refused to fall. Humanity should have been exterminated by now. Their homeworld, Earth, lay in ruins, its cities reduced to glassed wastelands. Their fleets had been shattered in the Battle of Orion's Veil, their colonies burned or enslaved. Yet somehow, impossibly, they endured. At the center of this defiance stood one man, General Elias Voss. Voss was not supposed to exist. By all calculations, the human resistance should have collapsed years ago. Every Dominion projection had assured victory. Every simulation had predicted the death of their leadership. And yet, here he was, alive, fighting, and impossible to kill. In the grand chamber of the celestial Concord, the High Executor of the Dominion slammed his clawed appendage against the crystalline table. His luminous eyes, once filled with assured dominance, burned with something alien to his kind. Fear. The assassins failed, he growled, his voice reverberating through the massive hall. General Elias Voss remains a threat. Across from him, the supreme strategist of the Clitharian war clans flicked through a series of intercepted transmissions. His species, a hive mind of chitinous horrors, had never lost a war in recorded history, until now. Their countless drones had been outmaneuvered by a force they had dismissed as inferior. The humans employ unconventional warfare, the Clitharian strategist chittered. They do not adhere to logic, they do not surrender. They are adaptable. A murmur of discomfort spread through the gathered alien leaders. For the first time in Dominion history, they were discussing a species not in terms of conquest, but in terms of survival. On the fringes of the known galaxy, in the ruins of Argos 7, Elias Voss stood atop the wreckage of an enemy warship, his armor caked in soot and blood. The burning ruins of the outpost cast long shadows across the battlefield, and the sky, once a deep violet, was now painted in the flickering orange of distant fires. Voss surveyed the aftermath. The Zorkai assassins were dead, all of them. They had come to end him, to erase the last major human leader. Instead, they had been hunted down, outwitted, and wiped out. A faint beep echoed in his earpiece. "He tapped it, Voss," a voice crackled through. His second-in-command, Captain Danya Rourke. "Report," Voss said, wiping blood from his brow. "The Dominion has gone silent," Rourke said. "They're regrouping, they're scared." Voss exhaled, his expression unreadable. "Then it's time to remind them why." He turned to his remaining forces. Ragged. Survivors, guerrilla fighters, a fraction of what humanity once had. But behind their exhaustion, there was fire. "Prepare the next strike," he ordered. "They sent assassins after humanity's last general. Now we burn their empires to the ground." The war was far from over. It was just beginning, the Dominion believed, in absolute control. Every war they had fought, every species they had conquered, had been subjected to the same relentless cycle: overwhelm, annihilate, dominate. It had worked for millennia, but now, against humanity, that certainty was beginning to crumble. The war should have been over, yet here they were, watching their empire burn. General Elias Voss knew the Dominion was regrouping. He could feel it in the way their attacks had slowed, the way their transmissions had grown frantic, the way their forces hesitated where once they had charged without fear. They weren't used to fighting ghosts. That's what humanity had become. Shadows in the ruins, whispers in the dark, a force that refused to be crushed. Voss and his people had no homeworld, no centralized command. The Dominion had wiped out Earth's surface in the first wave of war, expecting the rest of humanity to collapse in despair. But they had misunderstood a fundamental truth. Humans don't break, they adapt. And now they were fighting a war unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. Argos 7 had been a proving ground, but it was only the beginning. Voss had set his sights on something far larger, the heart of the Dominion's supply network. His plan was insane, even by human standards. The Dominion's supply chain stretched across thousands of light years, with their most critical station, Calith Prime, acting as the central node. If it fell, every frontline warship, every invasion fleet would be crippled. The problem: Calith Prime was a fortress world, protected by layers of automated defenses, orbital bastions, and a fleet large enough to flatten a planet. A direct assault was suicide, so they wouldn't attack head-on. They would hijack the Dominion's own weapons. A Dominion dreadnought, the Tyrant's Wrath, loomed in high orbit above the industrial world of Velos 6, a critical supply depot. For Calith Prime, it was one of the largest warships ever built, capable of glassing entire continents in a matter of hours, and it was about to become humanity's deadliest weapon. Under the cover of a salvaged Dominion transport, Voss and his strike team breached the dreadnought's lower hangars, slipping past the automated security grids using stolen biosignatures. Every move had been planned, every patrol route memorized, every possible failure accounted for, or so they thought. Halfway to the ship's primary reactor, the alarms blared to life. "We've been compromised," Captain Danya Rourke shouted, raising her rifle as Dominion sentries poured in from every corridor. Voss didn't hesitate. "Get to the bridge, now!" The firefight was brutal. The Dominion had strength in numbers, but humans were chaos incarnate. They moved unpredictably, fought in ways the Dominion's rigid tactics couldn't counter. Voss used the ship's corridors like a labyrinth, leading the enemy into kill zones. Explosive traps, hacked security turrets, blind spots in their surveillance grid. One by one, the sentries fell. By the time Voss reached the bridge, his team had seized control of the dreadnought. Rourke wiped blood from her cheek. That was too easy. "It's not over yet," Voss said. Staring at the central control panel, he accessed the dreadnought's planetary targeting array, linking it to their next target, Calith Prime. A single button press would launch a full-scale orbital bombardment. Voss turned to his team. "Let's give them a reason to fear us." The Dominion's greatest stronghold had never been attacked. They had never imagined anyone would be bold enough, reckless enough, desperate enough to try. When the first shockwave of fire and destruction erupted from the sky, the Dominion's high command barely had time to react. The orbital bastions crumbled. The war factories detonated in massive fireballs. The Dominion's own dreadnought, now under human control, rained hell upon their empire's core, and at the center of it all, Elias Voss watched from the dreadnought's bridge, unflinching. The war was no longer about survival. It was about revenge, and humanity was winning. Calith Prime burned. The industrial heart of the Dominion's war machine, once thought untouchable, was crumbling under its own weapons. But the Dominion was not finished. Not yet. From the far reaches of the system, the imperial fleet of the Sovereign Throne, the last and most elite force of the Dominion, was racing toward the battlefield. They were fast, ruthless, and desperate. If they could reclaim the tyrant's wrath, they could salvage what remained of their empire. Voss knew this moment would come. Standing on the bridge of the dreadnought, he watched as the Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace, their warships blotting out the stars. The Dominion had brought everything they had left. Hundreds of battleships, carriers, and dreadnoughts, all converging on his position. Even with the tyrant's wrath under his control, the odds were impossible. But humanity didn't fear impossible. "Odds, status?" Voss asked, his voice steady. Captain Rourke checked the dreadnought's energy reserves. "Shields are nearly depleted. Main weapons at 40% capacity. We can maybe take out 2, 3 ships at most before they overwhelm us." "Then we make those shots count," Voss said. The Dominion's fleet opened fire. Beams of plasma and kinetic rounds tore through space, closing in on the stolen dreadnought. The ship shook violently as the first volleys impacted the remaining shields, sending sparks and fire spraying across the bridge. "We won't last long," Rourke warned. Voss turned to his crew, his mind already racing through the possibilities. Every escape route was cut off. Every battle simulation ended in their destruction. "Unless we're not making it out of this," he said, locking eyes with his team. "But that doesn't mean we don't win." Silence. Then a slow, grim nod from Rourke. They understood. One last stand. One final act of defiance. Voss stepped forward, activating the dreadnought's final override system. A hidden protocol, buried deep in Dominion warships, meant only for the most extreme situations. Core detonation sequence engaged. A self-destruct mechanism, one that could rip apart an entire fleet if detonated at the right moment. "You're insane," Rourke breathed. Voss smirked. "We've established that." The countdown began, 300 seconds. The Dominion fleet closed in, their flagship, the Sovereign's Wrath, leading the charge. If there was one ship that could command the remnants of their empire, it was that one. If Voss could take it out, the Dominion would be left leaderless, their forces collapsing in disarray. He took a deep breath. "Helm, prepare for full burn. Direct course, ramming speed." Gasps filled the bridge, but no one questioned him. There was no other way. The tyrant's wrath, now little more than a burning husk, accelerated toward the Dominion flagship at full speed. The Dominion realized, too late, what was happening. A panicked transmission crackled through the comms. Human vessel, disengage immediately. You are... Voss cut the signal. Seconds left, Dominion ships scrambled to intercept, but it was too late. The tyrant's wrath slammed into the Sovereign's wrath, its failing shields barely holding as the two ships collided in a catastrophic explosion. A chain reaction ignited, the dreadnought's core detonating at the exact center of the Dominion fleet. A shockwave tore through space. Dominion warships buckled, shattered, and were ripped apart by the sheer force of the explosion. The battlefield that had once been the site of humanity's final defeat became the graveyard of the Dominion's last fleet. Somewhere in the wreckage, a single escape pod drifted silently through the debris field. Inside, Elias Voss exhaled, watching the dying remains of the Dominion's empire flicker in the distance. His hands trembled, his body aching, from the wounds sustained in battle. But he was alive. A faint voice crackled over his earpiece. "Voss, are you there?" It was Rourke. Her escape pod had made it too. He let out a quiet laugh, pressing the comms button. "Yeah, still here." For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe it. They had won. The Dominion was finished, and humanity would rise from the ashes. The battlefield was silent. Where once the Dominion's fleet had loomed with the weight of 1,000 conquests, now only twisted wreckage and burning. Remnants drifted through space. The once mighty war machine that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia was gone, reduced to nothing more than scattered debris. And humanity, the species they had sworn to extinguish, had survived. Inside the cramped escape pod, Elias Voss sat slumped against the cold metal walls, his breath ragged. Blood seeped from a deep gash on his forehead, but the pain barely registered. His eyes remained locked on the flickering console screen, where a single transmission repeated on a loop. Priority alert. Dominion High Command is unresponsive. The Sovereign Throne has fallen, awaiting further orders. There would be no further orders. The Dominion was leaderless, its greatest fleet obliterated, its strongholds left vulnerable. The empires that had once cowered beneath its shadow would rise in rebellion, tearing apart whatever remained. It was over. The war was over. A crackling signal cut through the silence. "Voss, you still breathing?" He exhaled a weak chuckle. "More or less. You?" Captain Daniel Rourke's voice came through, slightly distorted but steady. "Banged up. Pod systems are fried, but I'll manage." A pause. "We really did it, didn't we?" Voss closed his eyes. "Yeah." For the first time in years, there was no war to plan, no invasion to counter, no desperate fight for survival, just the unknown. Hours later, a faint beacon appeared on his scanner, a human fleet rising from the darkness. They weren't soldiers anymore, not just soldiers. These were survivors, refugees, the last remnants of a species that had refused to die. And now, as the wreckage of their greatest enemy floated behind them, they were free. Aboard the fleet's lead vessel, the Starborn Dawn, Voss stood before his people. Faces that had once been weary, beaten, and filled with quiet despair now held something else, hope. "Earth is gone," Voss said, his voice firm but not unkind. "The war took everything from us. Our homes, our families, our past." A hush fell over the gathered crowd, but not our future. He turned to the massive viewport, where the endless black of space stretched before them. The Dominion thought they could erase us. They thought they could break us. They were wrong. We are still here, and now we decide what comes next. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crew. Some whispered of finding a new homeworld, others of rebuilding the shattered colonies, some still carrying the fire. A vengeance in their hearts spoke of hunting down the last remnants of the Dominion, ensuring they never rose again. Voss let them speak. He wasn't a conqueror. He wasn't a ruler. He was just a soldier who refused to lose. Whatever came next, it would be humanity's choice. And for the first time in a long, long while, the stars no longer felt like a battlefield. They felt like a beginning, the end, or perhaps the beginning.